Michael Martocci of SwagUp, a company that makes swag for startups and other things. We actually use them at ShipHero, although I wasn't involved in that. One day I just found out that we had this swag and it was from you guys.
You're not the swag guy?
I am not the swag. I think Nicholas ordered it, but it's cool when your company gets a little bigger, you discover cool things. You're like, I had no idea that we were doing this, but it's pretty cool. But the stuff you guys make is pretty cool. So thanks for joining.
Yeah, no worries.
I want to talk about team because you guys grew a lot, but before that, I actually wanted to ask about positioning and also like sort of nonfiction business learning books. So I heard that you said that you were a fan of like the Seth Godin Purple Cow book, and that's where you came up with the emphasis on the swag packs, which for people that don't know, sort of your calling card is like companies like ShipHero. We have like a pack of swag that has like a hat and a bunch of other goodies that we send to our like remote employees and customers, and you guys just do it like from A to Z. You design the stuff, you store the stuff, you ship the stuff. So first of all, is that an accurate representation?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, at the end of the day, what we're basically doing is digitizing the swag supply chain and just making it really easy to interact with and, really simple to create and distribute branded items wherever you kind of need to, whether it's for customers or employees, integrating into different workflows and systems. So, but yeah, just taking the friction out of, buying and, creating and selling swag basically.
Right, and you guys are great at it. So to what degree how did that work? To what degree did that book sort of get you onto this path?
Yeah, I mean, that book's huge. I mean, the idea didn't come out of the book. It was more like, already in the swag space and then forming it around the principles of that book. I would say it's a combination of books. It's, Purple Cow, Positioning by Al Rees and Jack Trout. And then there's another book called Fizz, which is like a word of mouth marketing book that's really good. Jonah Berger from UPenn has another book called Contagious. All of these things kind of have the same principle of like the greatest way to grow really quickly and early on is to build virality and word of mouth into your products, by doing something different than other people. And then naturally by doing something different and doing it well over time, you have this compounding effect of, the company grows, you have more users tell other users, and you just keep going and going and going versus constantly relying on like paid media or, something like a Blue Apron where you saw, their market cap kind of rise and fall pretty quickly when paid media started getting very expensive. So when we started, it was very general. So it was like, okay, we're going to take swag and make it really simple and frictionless for startups. And that was Purple Cow kind of, because it was like, okay, we're focusing on this niche in the market, high growth startups, positioning in the language and how we present ourselves in the design of the site. But it wasn't enough, like that got us some initial traction and interest from companies, but we needed to take it a step further because there's 30,000 different swag companies in the country. 98% of them do under 2.5 million. So there's just a bunch of fragmentation. But then, one of our first orders was for these swag packs. It was, $10,000 order, and up to that point, I think we had probably done maybe 15, 20,000 in sales in general, because it was just the first few months. And then I was just like, if these people want this, and there's so many different logistical touch points involved to get this project off the ground for them on their side, that if we can productize this, then, we're going to grow like crazy. And it happened with, the first month where we started to focus on swag packs, we went from like $4,000 in sales a month to like 40,000 a month. And then, that first full year, we ended up doing like 3.3 million. And I would say 90% of it was just swag packs. That was just our positioning on the site said swag packs made simple. It still says stuff like that. So I think it was really huge for people to kind of figure out, okay, how is this company different than the 30,000 other swag companies out there?
Yeah, I love that. So I got like a bunch of things to dig into on that. Well, I want to stick on the business book thing for a bit. So my opinion is that I think business books stop as many companies from being formed as help them being formed. I think people look at it as like, oh, well, I have to have a Purple Cow differentiated company. And if I don't start, which I think is wrong. So sort of the counterexample of, if you looked at Shopify, like how are they a Purple Cow company?
Yeah, I mean, up to that point, there was never something like that. I mean, at the time of starting Shopify, now you have WooCommerce and all these other platforms. But at the time, the only way you can spin up e-commerce site was by coding one and building one out. There was no real platform.
BigCommerce was around before Shopify gained any traction, and I mean there was like Yahoo stores back in the day and some
Yeah,
other ones.
it's all about how approachable you make it and how easy it is for people to get off the ground, the friction that you remove, the barriers that you remove to getting started. So I mean, I wasn't around really thinking about e-commerce stores at the time of Shopify starting back in whatever it was, 2006 or seven, when they really were just getting going. But in my mind, I mean, even if there was one other solution or two other solutions, I mean, that still seems like enough of a differentiated product where the idea was, hey, anybody can be an entrepreneur, anybody can make money on this thing that's the internet. And I think if you hear that idea, for the most part, people haven't heard of BigCommerce or whoever it was at the time. I mean, that's a pretty interesting concept. Like, hey, my little store in Vancouver, I can actually turn that into a business and sell it to anybody online and kind of be like that Amazon company that I heard of. Like, I mean, that seems like a bit of an anomaly and a remarkable thing, like in 2000, whatever.
Yeah, I don't think I mean, that wasn't really the messaging at the time. I mean, really, if you look back at go to the Wayback Machine, you look at their messaging was actually pretty awful and generic. The way I think about it is that Purple Cow approach is a method of achieving distribution, and that's all it is. So, like, you've got great growth, and your distribution channel is that virality and that mind share that you have, where if someone's like, oh, I need swag for my remote team, they're like, swag up. Yeah. I'm like, you don't have to think about like, well, I can also in theory use some other company that does 6 other things. You know what I mean? Like you got the mind share, and that's great. And that's like an amazing approach if you could pull it off. But I think it's just one approach to gaining distribution. There's lots of other companies that have used different techniques, right?
Use partnership and strategic partners and channels like that, and build $100 million plus business without even having a brand. Just because you leverage existing distribution and do it well and execute well. So I agree. I mean, it's not to say that you need to have a purple cow to get a business off the ground, but I think too many businesses focus. They try to build marketing on top of something as if it's like this extra kind of piece like bolted on, whereas like you can build differentiation and virality into your product, into your brand, and if you can do that, it's going to make your cost of acquiring customers like so much cheaper. So yeah, it's a channel, but it's one of the cheapest channels that you can have, and it allows you to bootstrap because you're not so reliant on, are you giving your margin to a partner, are you giving your margin to Google AdWords, are you giving your margin to Facebook? You have it built into the product, and that's a huge advantage. So yeah, it's not the only way, but I think it's probably one of the best ways if you can figure it out.
Yeah. Oh, it's definitely a great approach. So another thing that you mentioned was like, don't tack on marketing. The product marketing needs to be product led marketing, right? So like, to pick a really current popular company, Fast, which is like a one-click checkout thing that raised like $100 million recently. Like they're great at marketing. They do all sorts of stuff, or great at marketing. They're very loud about marketing.
Yeah, they're good at getting attention.
They're good at getting attention, but I don't think the attention has anything to do with their product. So I would not bet on them because they're a product company and a marketing company, but like the marketing could be any product, and the exact techniques they're using would work. The marketing is not in any way tied to the product. So, so I don't think that's like a long-term, like that's not a great way to build a business. I think it's a great way to raise a lot of venture capital and spend it on marketing. But if the marketing isn't, if you can market a different company in the exact same way, and the marketing is just a marketing department, it's not actually, it's got nothing to do with your product. Versus, to go back to Shopify again, the model that they're on now, which is it's all about entrepreneurship. Like that'd be really hard for a company like yours, or pick any, like Walmart. Like how's Walmart going to say they're about entrepreneurship, right? Like it's just not going to work. because it's inherent to, it actually has to do with their core mission, and it's like authentic, right? And I think you do need to find that, which you guys have, and I think a lot of people don't. They think of marketing as a separate thing, right? It's like I have to add, sprinkle some marketing onto my product. Look at this.
Yeah, it's all intertwined. I mean, marketing is just the effect of us, sharing the work that we've done, showcasing the story of the people that work with us, launching new features, like making people happy and over again. Like, we don't necessarily think of marketing as like you said, like this thing that's outside of what we do on a day-to-day basis. Like, we don't use like an agency, for example, to go out and get us traffic, because I just don't know how that even works. Like, how can you just have this external company that knows nothing about what you do just all of a sudden like become a growth engine for you by generating like traffic and attention? Like, so I totally agree. Like, marketing is embedded in the product, and it shouldn't cost you that much in the early days if you're doing something really good and you're making customers happy. Fast is interesting.
It's a bit cliche, but one of my favorite marketing approaches is the shot on iPhone that Apple does. Yeah. It's just like, yeah, that's like that makes sense. That's Apple. Like, like it's all perfect, right? It just works. Like, it feels right. So I wanted to go back again to something you said earlier, which is that you didn't actually start the company focused on swag packs. What happened is you wanted to build a swag company. Sounds like you really knew the space pretty well. You understood the tons of players, they're all small, like how you wanted to build it. And then what happened was you were taking swings, right? You got some customers, and one of them was a home run, and you're like, shit, that's it. Let's double down and see if that works, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a constant kind of iterative, journey of figuring out like what we actually needed to build. In the beginning, it was very much just like, I was working at a VC firm for a little bit, a buddy of mine. And on the side, like in college, I knew a little bit about custom printing. I knew a bit about the supply chain, like the supplier network that made all the custom promotional items. So I knew how to tap into the suppliers if I needed to. And then just being around startups, it just seemed like there was a big gap, like servicing that market, and they love swag more than anyone. But so in the beginning, it was just very agency styles, hand to hand, just selling to them, trying to figure it out. And then, yeah, I mean, the swag packs was like this window into these companies. It became our mousetrap, basically, that allowed us to get into the door with really big companies, because you'd have like a Facebook, you'd have a Twitter, you'd have, Amazon, like these really big companies that typically have vendor relationships already. But since we were doing something that like their existing vendors like couldn't or didn't want to, or didn't like showcase their, to Amazon that they could do it, they ended up kind of like finding their way to us, like kind of like very bottoms up, like, small kind of nimble teams within these companies started reaching out. And then that allowed us, like I said, it's like a Trojan horse to get in the door. And then by getting in the door, you start to realize like, okay, how do they actually procure swag? How much do they spend on it? Who's in charge of it? How broken is this process? How many different vendors are they using? How do they manage, the intake of who, the sizes and who to send it to, and how do they manage those logistics? So it's just constantly this like listen, constantly keeping your eyes open to what the customers kind of need. Like, I don't think we ever really had a blueprint of like, this is exactly what we're going to build. This is exactly what we're doing. It was always kind of understanding and being reactive to customers. I think you need to have a bit of an opinion too, and like foresight as to where you're going to a degree, but you also have to be really flexible to understand like, okay, at the end of the day, you're just building what customers need. Like, you're solving their problems. And I think a lot of people kind of get stuck because they're so like, passionate about their solution to whatever problem they think exists, and they want to force their solution down people's throat. And that's never like been our thing. It's always been kind of like, let's observe, let's put something out there, observe, react, kind of change things a little bit, and just keep evolving. And I think that it's helped us really understand like how big of an opportunity it is like out there, to solve this problem. And we started to take a very like API tech driven approach. Halfway through, brought on CTO. Now we have about 45 software engineers, and that's totally now transforming like what we're capable of and the direction that we're going to go. But it's always very kind of customer informed.
Yeah, I think that's the summary of it, is like be obsessed with the problem, but not with the solution, because you're probably not going to get the right solution, before you learn anything, before you talk to that first customer or that 100th customer.
Yeah, and I think it was super valuable that I did sales for the first 2 years. I was talking to basically every single customer in the very beginning. We started to bring on some people to help, but somebody on the founding team or even the founder itself needs to be talking to customers every day in the very beginning to like really have your ear to the ground and understand like what exactly they're trying to solve. I think that's where sometimes like maybe engineering founders can kind of go wrong, is if they're not actually like in it day to day. They're not, experiencing the problem. They're not talking to the customers and hearing their frustration. But yeah, you got to be like down on the ground, like, figuring out what people need.
So I'm sure you get feedback from customers that's like, do this super niche thing. And you got to be like, well, that's going to help like 3 customers, but I really want to serve like 300,000 customers. So like, I can't put my time there. I got to go elsewhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you like, at least for us, we made kind of a 180 switch into terms of how we deal with that kind of stuff. In the very beginning, like when we literally had nothing, it was me starting it out of my house, in my mom's house, and that was the warehouse. You're very much in a yes, yes, yes mentality. Just say yes to everything, figure it out, go down all alleys, overturn every rock, figure out what people need. And just keep, we would do things like building shops on Shopify for companies if they wanted to, have a company store, really bootstrappy, hacky ways of doing things for people, these redeem pages that were built on top of like Wix and stuff. So there was a lot of that kind of stuff. We never went down the road on stuff like that would lead us to where we can never go back though. Like Jeff Bezos talks about like these doors that you can go through. Like there's ones that you can go through and come right back. And then there's ones you go through and you can't come back anymore. Almost like Monsters Inc. Like we never made decisions like that where, we were going to get pigeonholed down that road forever. But we were very like, let's explore everything. Let's make these customers happy, because that revenue in the early days, one, it was validation with all these customers and gave us credibility, but it also gave us the money to invest in what we actually wanted to do, like the business that we actually wanted to build when we didn't have the capital to do that. So, when we finally had the money to bring in a CTO and developers, then we could start to be a lot more like clear about, okay, this is the way that we're going, and we can be more selective about customers. But it's a tough balance in the beginning if you're not funded of, do you get picky about the types of customers you want, or do you just say yes, and then fire those customers later, or try to push them towards the way that you see things, going down the road. But now we're very much, the opposite of, we do something very specific. We've shed different things that we used to do in the past. And we're very focused on like, okay, we have enough data at this point to know where we're going. Obviously, we're constantly still, getting feedback, but we have a lot more kind of, direction of, okay, this is where we're trying to head to. And it might go down different paths, but, we're not going to go down that other route, and how that plays out is like, we could have very much went down the road of like being a tool for like HR teams specifically, and they would have wanted like lots of HR specific functionality where swag packs were like part of the onboarding, but then what else can you do to help us with our onboarding? But, we made a decision very clearly is like, our thing is specifically digitizing the swag supply chain. Like we just want to be the infrastructure that powers the creation and distribution of swag, no matter the use case. And we're not going to build, very specific functionality for different use cases. We'll just be a platform. And if you really want us, you can just embed us and integrate us into something else that's more, specific to that use case, versus trying to be like an onboarding tool or a sales and marketing automation tool. Like we're just there to help you from the sourcing component. So I think it changed a lot.
Yeah, I think that's one of those few decisions you make that sort of shapes the trajectory of the company. In your case, it sounds like it was, are we like a vertical company or a horizontal company, right? Like, are we solving like all your HR related issues, or are we a swag company that like you tap in to use to solve whatever various problems, which might be HR related, but we're a swag company, right? And like getting that definition right is huge, because the market size, but between the different directions is obviously significantly different. So
there's different players involved in different, different competitive landscapes. There's, new information you have to learn about different industries if you start going into them. Like we could have very much became like a procurement platform for physical items for offices, like snacks and desks and, laptops. Like there's so many different ways it could have went.
Right. So how did you make that decision? You make it your own? You have a bunch of people you speak to, you sit down and read some bunch of stuff. Like what's your process? How do you do it?
I mean, I'm mostly just a feel person. I mean, I think I have a pretty good business sense and intuition in general. Obviously I've read a lot, but I don't rely on books to like give me the answers to things. I just enjoy reading and learning. But I've surrounded myself with some mentors. We have Wade on our team that's almost like the president. Who's been a mentor of mine for like the last 3 years, and then came on more full time recently. So constantly running things by him and running things by other entrepreneurs. But it's more just kind of looking at the landscape and understanding like what else is out there. When you look at swag, like there's just no technology. There's not many SaaS tools out there. There's not many APIs. There's just this kind of blue ocean. And I haven't even read that book, but I have it. But there's like this blue ocean of just like opportunity to innovate and build new things. And a lot of the stuff that we build on a daily basis, like we joke about it with our product design team. Like there's no analogs to look at. Like we can't really look at things and be like, oh, that's a great way to do it. Let's do this. Like we're reinventing like different workflows when it comes to like the logistics and procurement of swag and integrations into suppliers and stuff that haven't been done before. And I think that's what makes it really interesting is like every day is new. It's almost like a startup within a startup every day, the different things that we're doing on both sides, like front end and back end. So I think it's just a kind of a feel by being in it for a good amount of time to understand that like, hey, there's a big gap here and it's kind of uncharted territory, and that's where we're gonna head versus kind of like, oh, we have these kind of customers already, but we don't really know anything about what they're looking for, like, and it seems kind of crowded.
Right. So I guess part of the reason why you could get away with that sort of approach is you said you spent some time working at a VC firm, but you actually aren't funded. You're self-funded, right?
Yeah, all bootstrap. I mean, we had some small lines of credit about 1.5 to 2 years in, but besides that, we still own 100% equity and all that.
Right. Yeah. So the equity is what gets to make the decision. So why bootstrap? Why did you not go the VC route?
It wasn't, from day one, it wasn't like a VC backable type company, or that wasn't even the journey. It was very like I said, it's always been this very iterative approach of like, let's see if something exists there. Let's see if there's an issue. Let's see if people even care. And then you snowball to the next level. Okay, let's focus on swag packs. Okay, like, and there's the cash dynamics of this business are pretty favorable when it comes to, running it bootstrap, because you're not putting out a lot of money. You don't have to have, supplier, like your own supply, you don't have to have inventory. You don't have to have manufacturing capabilities. You don't even necessarily need to have like a warehouse right away. You can bootstrap kind of a hacky website with, some free tools, which is what we did. So there wasn't really a need for the capital in the beginning. Like, I think people raise money too quickly a lot before they even know what the business is. And they're using other people's money in the most risky time where you have to give up the most equity just to kind of figure out if people even care enough about their business. And obviously different people are in different situations. They can't necessarily make jumps without having the funding, because they need to support themselves or whatever it might be. But I just think in general, there's just too much money too early in companies before they really know what their business model is. And I think in the beginning, like the best thing you can do is just get the initial traction, get the initial revenue. Then it's very easy to raise money. You can raise money and on terms that are, pretty fair. You're not giving out a ton of money. But I also just like, I have this big belief in just like overall, freedom is like really the biggest goal when running a business. Like otherwise, like why run a business? Obviously, to have an impact, build something great, do something for customers. But at the same time, as a founder, you want freedom. Like that's why you don't work at a company. You want to be able to make decisions. You want to be able to live life how you want, to make, to have the hours you want, to wake up when you want. And I think that there's a lot of value in kind of having the autonomy, both from an investor standpoint and customer standpoint. Like we don't have any single customer that would like sink us if they left. And I think that that's also really important too, where it just gives us the complete control to kind of make the best decisions that we feel are right, for the business. And it's just like a lot more, enjoyable, I think, on a daily basis, to just run a business in that environment versus having like these outsiders kind of trying to, dictate, the direction you should take things because they think they know the business more than you or something, Obviously you can find great investors, but there's not that many out there, I don't think.
Yeah, I think a key point that I know I've underestimated in my life, even though I thought I understood it, was cash conversion cycle, which is I'm assuming this, so you tell me if I'm wrong, that when a customer purchases from you, they pay you right away on a credit card, and then you're paying your vendors on some sort of, net 14, net 30, whatever, some sort of terms, versus like a typical, say, e-commerce company where you might be ordering your products from overseas and you might be paying your suppliers 60, 90 days before it shows up. So in that case, you need cash to buy the product. In your case, you just use the customer's cash to buy the product that you're selling to them, right? You're not holding stock and you're not out. You don't need a large amount of cash. Is that correct?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, different customers have different relationships, but in general, we have negative cash conversion cycles, which is, huge. You can basically hold on to customers' cash to reinvest in the business. I know Amazon, even Gymshark, both of those businesses have benefited greatly through negative cash conversion cycles. And I don't think that most, startup founders really get the impact of that, early on, and what that can do, because it's compounding. If you can hold on to cash for 10 days, reinvest it, it grows, generates more cash, it just keeps compounding. So, having that is, we wouldn't have been able to, between that and having a high Amex credit line, we wouldn't have been able to bootstrap the business.
Yeah, my e-commerce company, we went through really tough time where like the person we had outsourced to, like our third party logistics company, went bankrupt. And basically like it set us back to zero. So basically we had no money in the bank, like 10 years post founding, and no product. And what we did is we launched a daily deal site because all we needed to have was one product to sell each day. And then I only had to buy 7 days worth of products. I only had to stock 7 products, versus before that, the e-commerce company, we had stocked like, 800 products, right? Because we had a regular e-commerce company. And like getting that cash conversion cycle there wasn't negative like yours, but it was reasonable, right? I think a lot of people look at it and they're like, they come up with a business that requires $1 million of inventory, or spending $1 million on engineers before you can get a first customer. And like, you can't bootstrap that. Like, that's fine if you're going to raise capital, but like you could bootstrap a company that only requires $50,000 worth of stock.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's all, we have a lot of control in terms of like our burn. It's like, it's all around like, how much do we want to hire? How much do we want to invest in growth? But it's not like, oh, if we grow, we're going to run out of cash. Actually, as we grow, we get more cash, to keep in the business. So, it gives us a lot more kind of, clarity and control over the path, because it's like, okay, if we don't want to get that risky, we just won't make that many investments, and we'll just grow at the pace we want. And then, but I think at a certain point, if you get to a crossroads, constantly, where it's like cash or investment, like, do you take the safe route? Do you go after the opportunity that is pretty clear? If you're doing that over and over and over again, then you need to legitimately like consider, like, do we bring in outside money? It's just and a lot of it comes down to personal preference. So it's like, is that what you want? Do you want to build the biggest business possible, or do you want to grow in some sort of sustainable fashion and build a nice, pretty big business and have control? So I think I still haven't really figured out, what I want just yet. But at least I have the control to make the decision.
Well, so you have 3 options, right? You could focus on making a profit today, making a profit in, X years, or selling for max value, right? Like, those are basically your 3 options when you run a business. So what are you feeling like? How do you operate today? Like, which one of those 3 things are you trying to maximize?
What I tell people is I want to grow as quickly as possible without needing outside capital. So that's basically it. Like, we have a very aggressive vision and goal, and platform approach, and we just want to kind of toe the line of how much capital do we need. Like, we set a buffer threshold of like, okay, we don't want cash to drop below this, and we constantly go through exercises of like expansion planning. Okay, in this next expansion planning, we're allocating X amount of budget. Here's what everyone wants. We go through like a very strict prioritization and then execute on it. And we just keep doing that, and we just make sure that we don't go to kind of like the threshold that we don't want to get below. And we're going to be as aggressive as possible, within, above that threshold of cash on hand. And that's really it. I mean, and like I said, if that backlog of expansion planning and opportunities just gets so large and we get so far behind on it because, of this arbitrary kind of, cash level that we want to hold, then at that point we might say, okay, hey, we're going to raise, $50 or $100 million and really go after it. But until until we have a very clear way that, okay, we can deploy this capital efficiently, we know how we're going to do it, we have a plan to do it, until that becomes a barrier, then, I think we'll just stay on the same path.
So you're basically maximizing for size. You're trying to get the company to be as big as possible, within constraints, right? But you're not really worried about like, hey, what's my profit going to be in 2021?
No, I mean, we haven't looked at the margin side. Obviously we look at it because our margin funds the business in general, but there's so much work that can be done on optimizing ops and supply chain and margin and profitability of the business that we ignore. Like we don't have like a net income goal that we need to hit, for the year. It's more, growth and revenue based, so yeah, it's definitely around growth.
Okay. So as you've been growing, like what's the thing that's ahead of you? That's going to be the next thing that's like, this is what's going to break as we continue to grow.
I mean, it's a logistical beast, kind of what we're doing. I mean, not only are we running like a fulfillment center, not only are we running like a front end e-commerce site and sales team and marketing, but you also have like this network of vendors that you have to, work with and integrate with, and everything's custom. If you think about, let's say a given month, let's just throw out a random number. Let's say we have 500 orders. Within a 500 orders, you typically have, let's say, 7 different SKUs, 7 different items for that, order. So that's 3,500 unique, one-off products that you have to create. It's an on-demand manufacturing with different, logos and colors and, 3,500, and then there might be in total 500,000 units, and getting all of that to work and to arrive on time and to be correct and be the right quality, and, figure out how to translate that to the different teams that need to do something with those items. Like there's so many touch points. So we're constantly like, right now the real focus is just on like operations from end to end, supply chain, sourcing, what happens in our warehouse. Because to a degree, things like that do break on a daily basis. I mean, we went from, December 2020 was 850% above December 2019. And, it's one thing to do that in a pure SaaS business. It's another to do that in, a physical, products business with fulfillments. And obviously you guys are you have a SaaS component, but you also have, distribution centers. If you had one single distribution center and have to grow at 850% in 12 months, like there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen and break and have to change and evolve. And you're going to build systems and realize, shit, we have to build them this way instead. So we're basically in a process right now of totally reinventing the back end of our business. We're like, okay, we can keep adding on top of what we've built, or we can basically start from scratch and do it with the learnings that we have and spin out a separate team. And that's kind of where we're at. We're like basically re-architecting the way that we think about SKUs and the way that we think about products, and integrating with suppliers and the fulfillment center and barcoding, all that kind of stuff. Is really getting reinvented. So I think if we kept on the track of where we were with the existing infrastructure, then just ops in general would buckle because there's just too much volume.
Yeah. So you have like a pretty large, complex, integrated problem, right? So. And I'm going to use the difference between complex and complicated. Complicated being like there's a bunch of different pieces that are all complicated, versus complex where they all interact. So like sort of you change one, it changes everything else, right? So you've got the harder one, which is the complex problem, right? Your warehouse runs based on your software, but your software has to serve your warehouse. So they're all kind of feeding feedback loops into each other if things work or if things don't. So how do you manage that? Do you have one person who's in charge of figuring it out? Do you have a few different people? What's your process, and what's the team structure look like around solving that?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think the team needs to evolve and continue to get better and better. Our CTO has always been kind of like the architect of the supply chain and operations from start to finish, which is interesting. I mean, he has lots of different background, but he had this very like API first driven approach when he first came on, even before I kind of really understood the value or significance of that. So he's always been kind of the architect of like how to structure the system. But we also have a director of operations that I would say is kind of the the business owner on that side. We actually just brought on like an SVP of product, specifically for like ops product, and we're working on bringing in like a VP of logistics from one of the top startups in the world that is very logistics heavy. So we have some pieces, and it's really me, this SVP of product, our CTO, our director of operations, kind of all working together. But the team is going to evolve a ton over the next 6 months. Like when we go through those stages and expansion plans, as I've talked about, a lot of that budget is allocated towards supply chain, procurement, ops tech. We just brought on like 12 more developers specifically for operational tech as well. So there's gaps and we have to fill them in.
Yeah, it's, as someone who's been in a similar situation, it sounds pretty scary. I'm getting anxiety just thinking about it. So are those people all reporting to you and you're making that decision, or is there someone that everyone's reporting to who's making these decisions?
I mean, there's different people on different teams. Ultimately, the director of operations owns, the day-to-day, what happens when it comes, from the time ordering it from the suppliers to the time it goes out the door, right? She owns that process from start to finish. And then when it comes to like architecting how we solve that problem through technology, she works hand in hand with our CTO, but now she's going to be working hand in hand with this, SVP of product on that side. So I get involved. I'm more involved on the, user side, the front end facing technology, what our customers want, how that has to interact with, the back end operating system and how those two things, talk to each other. And then overall, like where are we trying to go with like our platform and, why vendor integrations are important, all that kind of stuff. But I don't make as many decisions when it comes to like, the technology that's needed, like in the fulfillment center, how to set up the barcoding or, how to connect this thing to that thing. That's more on that side. But like I said, I think there's a couple more VP level kind of talent that we'll want to bring in that could, work with the director of operations, more on like a kind of architecture standpoint. Like she's great when it comes to, building out the teams, leading them, managing, being kind of the business owner that gives the feedback back, but not as much like the architect of the system. And our CTO is a brilliant guy, but he's also not a supply chain guy by trade. So he needs that kind of counterpart.
So one heuristic that I think about a lot is complex systems only work if they're evolved from smaller complex systems that work. And if you try to build a complex system from scratch, never works. That the only way to do it is have a system that accomplishes some stuff and then just keep building on top of it. And it's like, I forget the name of the parable, but like the boat where you change every board eventually becomes a different boat, but it's sort of the same boat. You can do that. But if you sort of say, we're going to start from scratch and throw up this whole new system that's going to be way better than the old system, like I've never seen it actually like accomplish something. Like I've never seen it actually work. I mean, you see this a lot sorry, go ahead.
No, I think you never really build from scratch. You iterate on something that's been out there already. You just don't want to necessarily put code on top of code when there's some fundamental things that need to be different, and it's more efficient to build it the right way versus constantly adding on to something. But to your point too, like if the nucleus or the atomic design was incorrect, then obviously you don't want to build on top of it because you're gonna have a bad foundation. But there's some like fundamental changes that we need to make around like how SKUs are considered. Like we have SKUs that are, you can have this bottle from this supplier, this bottle from this supplier, this bottle from this supplier. But really the way that we should be thinking about it is like Swag Up has this SKU and it has supplier 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it can be sourced in that way. And then you can route orders and have backups and all that kind of stuff. So there's not like a total complete overhaul, but there's some fundamental, things that we thought were true when we started that aren't necessarily true. And it's not like detrimental to the business in either way. It's just that we think that you can just scale a lot better by setting it up in a different way. But a lot of the stuff will be recycled. I mean, it's not like a complete overhaul of what's been built, but I agree with what you're saying. I think you have to have, that's why, we're not saying we solve problems for a vertical, even though we did focus very much on the HR use case. worked out really well. Oh, it happens that our platform actually works for all use cases. And so I think on the customer facing side, you can see that in practice. But I think we had lessons to learn, from day one to now when it comes to like the actual operations side.
Yeah, so I mean, we totally made a lot of architectural mistakes as well when we started. The way I would approach it is, so let's say you have a product, right? And then I would add another level of abstraction, which is like supplier products, right? And then keep the core product thing, build the supplier level products. Now you've got your problems sort of a little bit of a hacky way, and then pull out the underlying thing, but constantly have it in production and working, versus trying to like build a whole new thing and then just sort of like insert it in one place, because you'll end up with just like way more. It's in general, like it just tends to fail. Like you see it a lot, this like total rip and replace with a new solution in like government sort of projects, where it's like, we're going to invent a new like high-speed rail or something, right? Or like a nuclear reactor, and then it's like 10 times the budget and like 30 years overdue, you know what I mean? Taking the more incremental approach of like, let's just upgrade it a little bit, and let's upgrade it a little bit. Eventually you get to like a much better.
I think the nuance is that our business model is changing though. I mean, we're fundamentally changing like who our customers are. At the end of the day, when we started, we built a monolithic system that services Swagga, versus a modular system that can be leveraged by other companies to build on top of. So we're basically want to change how we go to market, the types of customers we have, how the operating system can be leveraged by other companies. And because of how intertwined it is to our own daily operations, there's just things that would never work when it comes to like letting other companies leverage what we've built. So there's just certain things, but I appreciate the approach of like, take what you have and figure out how to engineer it in the way that scales, versus like, hey, you're going to start from scratch. And there are conversations that we have on a daily basis. I just think that I get that it can be a trap sometimes, starting from scratch, but we don't necessarily see it as starting from scratch as much. There's just like new things that we want to do that we're not capable of doing right now.
Yeah, so like we have none of the code written in the first few years of ShipHero exists anymore. So we did replace everything, but it was all very replace one piece, have a new version, then sort of turn it off the old version, but it still sort of works, and then just do it really piecemeal.
That's what we're doing. So if you think about our operations, you have design, you have fulfillment, you have quality control, you have logistics, you have all these different pieces. You have our supplier catalog. We think of them as pieces of our overall operations. And basically, we're building out modular APIs and platforms for each piece of it, and then replacing them in the main system one by one, calling through APIs. Versus, it's not like the entire ERP, the entire operating system is getting replaced. We're actually not even keeping an ERP anymore in our operating system. We're breaking out the pieces of what we do into modules that can be called via APIs, and then they can plug back into the existing ERP that we have, and that will still kind of be there. It's just that the piece of the puzzle that you need is getting upgraded, one by one, basically, to be able to be accessed by other companies as well in a way that's not kind of tied to a monolithic system.
Right. You keep using the word monolith, so it makes me sound like your CTO is going to microservices. Is that correct or no?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, we've always been, kind of API led and building out microservices for ourselves, but there's still pieces of it that aren't really like that. And also we want everything to be externalizable. We want everything to be, accessed by outsiders if they want.
Yeah, I mean, the API driven economy it's already here and only going to continue. So yeah, I mean, to the degree you can make your product as API accessible in as small chunks as possible, because people end up using your product in all sorts of weird ways, which is good, because it's like you're using it, you didn't have to even think about the use case. You gave them the tools, and they figure out how to use your business for something you didn't even think of, which is
exactly. You never know where people are going to take it, and you never know what parts of your process or operations or product they're going to want. It's not always that they need everything.
Yeah, for sure. So you're doing something else that's super scary, which is hiring a lot of senior people, which you have to because you're growing a lot, but it's still super scary because you're giving, senior people are brought in by definition to figure out how to solve problems on their own, right? Which means you have to give them sort of the rope to make decisions that maybe you wouldn't have made, right?
Yep.
So, like, is that something that's like you're nervous about, or how you feel about that?
No, not really. I mean, it comes down to like you have to be really disciplined about like how you hire and who you hire. I mean, we get thousands of applications, yeah, 500 to 1,000 applications a month. We barely hire anybody, so it's we're very kind of picky about the types of people, and obviously we're not great. I mean, we get better and better about hiring over time, but I think you have to find really great people and put a lot of trust in them. Like once you found them, but then you also have to be able to make decisions quick. I'm a proponent of give people a lot of trust and leverage right off the bat. Give them more power than you probably should, and see where they go with it. And you'll figure out pretty quickly can they sink or swim, and then if they sink, you have to make a move really quickly. But what I found is that as a founder, if you hold on to the work for too long and you tie your ego and pride to like you being the one that started it and you being the one that is the reason it's successful, you end up just becoming a bottleneck. You try to do everything and you end up doing everything at 40% because you're like stretched thin in a million different directions, and you start jumping from context. You get into this meeting about hiring and you get this meeting about product and this and that, and you're not really focused on any single one of them. And I think as a CEO, you need to just be the person on top, really making sure that everything fits within the vision and the structure that you're trying to get towards. But then from a daily operations kind of standpoint, you shouldn't really be involved. And I'm still involved in certain pieces just because we haven't gotten to that stage just yet. But you shouldn't necessarily be the one making every single call and making every single move and being the reason why things have to move forward. And I think there's a little bit of inherent laziness in me that has helped us get to that point quickly. I think there's value in being a little bit lazy when it comes to being a founder, because you're willing to let other people do some stuff and you actually find out like, shit, actually this is actually better. Like they're actually doing it just as good or better than I would have done it because I'm not able to give it the same attention. So I don't really worry about letting senior people, and I think you have to have a good culture and find the right people and give them a lot of leverage, and then get out of the way and just make sure it fits within the guardrails of kind of like where you're trying to head. But it's it's a much better existence than the opposite of where you feel like you have to have control over every single thing and your life is miserable because all you do is micromanage everything going on.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, and advice I need to take more personally. So I think it's a great great insight to wrap up on. Can you let everyone know, Swag Up, how they can find out more, how they can follow you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm relatively active on Twitter. Just my name. It's just Michael Martocci, Martocci. We're swagup.com, swagup HQ on Twitter. My email is right in my bio on Twitter, so I'm totally DMs are open, emails are open. Always down to help people or talk about some of these specific topics in depth. I learned a lot about APIs and microservices. I learned a lot about supply chain over the last 2-3 years that I didn't know, and I'm constantly evolving. I'm always open to hearing other people out. And I think just kind of that constant curiosity is what's really important. Is like kind of never losing that. So down to connect with anyone.
Yeah, so I really appreciate the time. Super helpful call. I hope I can get some of your chill about hiring senior people and just letting them go. And thanks a lot for the time.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me.